Welcome to another edition of This Day in History here on the GoodMicWork Commentaries YouTube channel. This one is going to be interesting. It's going to be different, and it's going to be interesting. Today, September 26th, 2019, is the 20-year anniversary of the last time that I witnessed a WWE title change hands live and in person. This will be a review of WWE Unforgiven 1999, which honestly is not a very good pay-per-view. As a matter of fact, it's kind of a clusterfuck. But I thought this would still make a fun video to do because I have a few stories about my experience going to the show that some of you might find interesting, and some of these stories many of you have heard before. But with WWE moving SmackDown to the Fox network in 1 week's time, a show that I will be attending live in LA at the Staples Center, and I will be witnessing Brock Lesnar versus Kofi Kingston for the WWE title, I may finally get to witness a title change hands in person again for the first time in 20 years. So I thought this would make a really fun and appropriate video to do, and we're going to take a look at this goofy-ass pay-per-view, talk about it in a very casual way, probably poke some fun at it, and I will give you guys some backstory with me personally and everything that I was dealing with at this pay-per-view. Now, this, of course, goes down in Charlotte, North Carolina at the Charlotte Coliseum on September 26th, 1999. This thing wasn't quite a sellout, but it was close to a sellout. And this was also right after Hurricane Floyd. Now, I was extremely affected by this hurricane. This thing was a nightmare. And I used to live in eastern North Carolina. I was originally from Michigan, but spent close to 20 years in North Carolina before coming out here to the West Coast in California. And during my time in North Carolina, I would go to many shows with my friend Daniel. Shout out to him, who I'm sure is listening right now. And I've told these stories a lot throughout the years of all of the traveling we would do. We would be all up and down the East Coast, especially in the Carolinas and Virginia, going to every Raw, house show, and pay-per-view that would come through there, and there was a lot every year. As a matter of fact, in the year of 1999, I went to 3 pay-per-views. Ironically, all 3 of them kind of sucked. I went to WrestleMania 15, which is not regarded as one of the better WrestleManias. It's pretty much one of the worst. I was also at the King of the Ring 1999 in Greensboro. I also did a 20-year anniversary This Day in History video on that event as well a couple of months ago back in June. I'll put that link right up in the cards for you, and I'll put it down below in the description if you want to check that out. And that King of the Ring was also not one of the better King of the Rings compared to others. And here we are just a couple of months later. I'm at Unforgiven in Charlotte, and this was a wacky-ass Unforgiven. And even crazier than that, I was at the first 2 Unforgivens. I was at the Unforgiven in 1998, which was a lot better than 1999, and that one took place in Greensboro with the Inferno match and Dude Love versus Austin and all that shit. So I was very much involved in wrestling, and I would go to shows anytime they were anywhere near me in North Carolina. But this one here was interesting because, like I said, the hurricane had just blown through there, and this was a gnarly one. This one dumped a lot of rain on us. It wasn't so much powerful as it was just intense with the rain, and it kind of hovered for a bit. And if I remember right, Floyd kind of blew through right after another hurricane just a couple of weeks before, a tropical storm or whatever it was. Anyway, whatever happened, we got a shitload of rain dumped on us, and the rivers rose. And the town that I was living in at the time was near the Tar River, which just went, dozens of feet over flood stages and flooded the entire damn town to where stop signs, street signs were completely submerged underwater. You couldn't even see them. And in my apartment where I lived, I was on the 2nd floor, and most of the 1st floor of my unit, of my apartment complex, was flooded. A lot of people lost their cars. I had a friend that lived right up the road, and she had called me like the night before we were about to get hit by this thing and told me to move my car up there. And it's a good thing she did because it saved my car, most likely. So I was deeply affected by this. So I lost power for days. I was stuck up in my apartment with no power. There was no cell phones back then. I had a battery-powered radio and a few candles, a bunch of granola bars, and some Gatorade. But the grocery stores weren't even open because we had no power. And you couldn't even drive anywhere because the roads were flooded. So we were just stuck there, and it sucked. And looking back, I don't even know how the hell I made it to this pay-per-view because this was pretty shortly after this time. And we somehow made it to Charlotte for Unforgiven, and I would also make it to Greensboro the very next night. I was actually on the floor. I was like, 10 or 11 rows back for the This Is Your Life segment on Raw the night after Unforgiven here that I think still to this day stands as the highest rated segment in Raw history. So I got to witness history that night, the night after Unforgiven here. But this pay-per-view, not so much. There were a few interesting tidbits about the pay-per-view. It was the final pay-per-view for Vince Russo. I think it was only maybe 2-3 weeks after this. He would leave for WCW, and he would be gone by the time No Mercy rolled around in October. It was also interesting to note that The Undertaker is actually on the pay-per-view poster for this, but he got injured and took some time off before re-emerging the following year as the biker Undertaker. So he missed this pay-per-view. Ken Shamrock was also booked for this show, and he was ousted at the last minute due to injury, and he would never return. So this was the last time we would ever see Ken Shamrock, and would also be the very first ever pay-per-view match in the WWE for Chris Jericho. And stay tuned for my comments on Chris Jericho and X-Pac's match, because I have a really interesting story about what took place after this event. I've told the story before, but in case you've never heard it, there was actually an automobile accident on the freeway heading to Raw the next night, and I got a chance to hang out with Chris Jericho and Edge and Christian on the side of the fucking road. Very interesting. So anyway, we'll get into all that as we go through here. Like I said, this pay-per-view was not very good. It was so clusterfucky. It speaks volumes to the way things were booked back then, and it was very, very much Russo. It was just had his fingerprints all over this thing. And one of the main storylines going on at the time is the referee strike. They are citing unsafe working conditions. What else is fucking new? I guess they're tired of getting beat up, basically, is the storyline here. So they got a bunch of scab referees, a bunch of replacement referees, which are basically backstage agents and producers like Steve Lombardi, Tom Pritchard, Harvey Whippleman, and I think maybe a couple of others that they used on TV. The show opens up with a really long and dramatic video package. I remember being in the crowd that night watching it on the Big Tron, and when they open up the show with all of the pyro and introduce all of the audience and home to the Charlotte audience, you can see me. Here I come. You ready for it? Bam. There I am. All 165 pounds of 23-year-old GoodMicWork with a ponytail holding up a sign that says, "It burns when I pee." Yep. That's me, ladies and gentlemen. No wonder I was single. But anyway, you can catch me in the opening there, which I think is really funny. You can also see me a lot in the Survivor Series, or at the Survivor Series in 2001. I was facing perfectly right at the hard cam, and you can see me throughout that entire pay-per-view virtually up in the stands. But this was the only shot I could get of myself on this pay-per-view unless the camera cut to me during the show. But I didn't notice it when I watched it back. And I haven't even really watched this pay-per-view many times. Maybe 1 or 2 times in my life have I ever taken a look at this thing on television. I've never really even heard the commentary for the show until I rewatched it for this review. So anyway, pretty funny to see me in the opening there. And yes, feel free to make fun of that ridiculous sign. We were into that. That was only one of like maybe 5 or 6 signs that I would take. We would write all sorts of goofy shit on those signs. I had all sorts of dumb ones, and we would just hold them up one at a time. And a few of the signs, I got the ideas from other signs, because I think I saw "It burns when I pee" somewhere else at like a house show or something, laughed my ass off. And there's no social media or, cell phone cameras, so nobody like knows of these things. So I'm like, I'm going to steal that and I'm going to make my own sign. And there was a couple of other phrases. I think there was one that either I wrote or my friend wrote. It was like Britney Spears Goldberg or something like that. I don't know. But WWE used to encourage that. Now they take signs away. If you say even the slightest, edgiest thing on a sign, they will yank it from you, where back in the day, 20 years ago, they wanted you to bring the signs. They wanted you to be as immature and sophomoric on those signs as possible. And as a matter of fact, looking in the crowd, like everybody had a sign. There was probably like a dozen signs that said something like Y2 gay or some sort of gay reference like that. It was so ridiculous how much of this shit you would see, especially in the South. North Carolina was a really interesting place to go to a wrestling show in, but it was a really fun time, and it was a fun time to be a fan, and it was just a wild audience, man. The crowd was always rabid. This was an older crowd too, and we're all drinking beer, and it's just, hot and sweaty and testosterone and all these things. The conditions inside of a WWE event 20 years years ago were much different than what you see now. It's crazy, but it was a great time to be alive, man. Great time to be a wrestling fan. Let's get into the matches here. The show opens up with Val Venis taking on Steve Blackman. We've got the Brooklyn Brawler as your scab referee in this thing. Now, Val Venis had stolen Steve Blackman's bag of weapons that he carries to the ring, and he's been using it the past couple of weeks on TV. The match was nothing really great here. What was interesting is what took place after the match. Val Venis won pretty much completely clean with the money shot, and after the match, Blackman retrieves the bag of weapons, pulls out the kendo stick, and just tattoos poor Val's head. I mean, that stick broke and wrapped around the head of Val Venis, knocking him completely out. The EMTs come out to the ring, and I believe this was the first time we ever saw BB, the big, busty, blonde EMT that WWE would use in bikini contests, and I think he even stuck her in the ring once or twice. But the interesting spot, and one that I completely forgot about that took place right at the end, was Jim Dotson, WWE's head of security at that time, the big jacked up guy who was just awesome. I saw this guy up close so many times. I had so many close front row seats or floor seats where I would be in pretty close proximity to Jim Dotson a lot throughout the years. And that guy was jacked. And me and my friends, we used to always comment on him, like, why the hell is he not a wrestler? And it was just another example of why WWE was so great and WCW sucked balls, because their head of security was like 100-year-old Doug Dillinger, who, you know, is no slouch or anything like that. But when you compare the two companies' head of securities, it was like night and day. You had Jim Dotson, who could, you know, probably bench 500 pounds, and old-ass Doug Dillinger. It was just funny for a fan who took sides in a wrestling war to be on the side that had a beast like Jim as the head of their security. And when Blackman, I think, is he's shoving around some EMTs. I think he's pushing them away from Val Venis, and that's when Dotson gets in the ring and spears Steve Blackman. And I think they had even had a run-in or two on television prior to this. And it was interesting because I completely forgot they did this. And when he finally did spear Blackman, I remember being in the audience being like, finally they're going to do something with this guy. I thought it was only a matter of time before he got in the ring anyway. And for some reason, that whole thing was dropped. They never mentioned it again. I don't remember Jim getting involved physically after that ever again. Jim just went back to doing his head of security role, and that's it. So that whole thing was kind of dropped. And rest in peace to Jim Dotson. I can't remember what year he died, but it's been pretty recently. I think maybe like 2015 or something like that. Just such a shame. The dude was pretty cool. Got a chance to see him and meet him once or twice, and I really liked that he got in the ring and took to Steve Blackman, but we never got the payoff there, and that match was what it was. The next matchup was D'Lo Brown taking on Mark Henry. Now, Mark Henry is the European champion in this. D'Lo had held the European and Intercontinental titles, dropping them both to Jeff Jarrett at SummerSlam when Mark Henry turned on him. Why did he turn on him? Because Mark Henry was overweight, and D'Lo had dropped a lot of pounds and gotten himself into really good shape, and I guess he was trying to help out his friend, you know, be healthier and live a longer life, and teaching him to eat right and exercise. And Henry absolutely hated it, asked for sauce with his food, and he was whining and bitching about the exercising. And I guess that's what led to him turning heel on D'Lo at SummerSlam and helping Jeff Jarrett win both titles. And the next night on Raw, or maybe it was SmackDown, I don't remember, Jeff Jarrett awarded and just handed off the European title to Mark Henry. And Mark Henry would be defending it here in this match. He did a backstage interview first prior to this match with Lillian Garcia's got a couple of girls with him as well. He whispers something nasty in her ear. I guess he was hitting on her, and Lillian nails sexual chocolate with a wicked slap right across the face. And after another cutaway to the refs who are picketing on the outside of the building, we do get the D'Lo match with Mark Henry up next. Tom Pritchard, Dr. Tom, is the scab referee for this, wearing an ugly-ass pair of like blue sweatpants or something. And D'Lo would wind up winning, beating Mark Henry with the lowdown, or the frog splash. I think that's what he called his version of the frog splash, in a pretty good match. You could see that Henry was starting to improve. This really was the 3-year anniversary of his debut in the company, because he debuted at Mind Games, which was a September pay-per-view all the way back in 1996. So he had improved leaps and bounds by this point. Still would have room to improve, but I really liked this version of Mark Henry around 1999. And I thought he looked okay in his match with D'Lo, and he was starting to become somebody that sort of knew what he was doing, and that always made me happy because I always liked Mark. But he dropped the European title here to D'Lo, who at the time I always thought was hugely over. I liked D'Lo. I thought he was a great wrestler. I was proud of him too. I was happy for how much weight he dropped. He got in great shape, because when you remember when he was with the Nation of Domination and he was in the suit, he was quite chubby. So he got himself really slim and became very athletic and put on some good wrestling and one of the best wrestlers WWE had at that time. And unfortunately, it would be right after this, just a couple of weeks after this match, would be the unfortunate accident that would take place involving D'Lo and Droz, which would render Droz paralyzed for the rest of his life, and he's in a wheelchair to this day. So that's kind of sad, and I'm not sure if D'Lo really got over that, and it's a shame too, because D'Lo looked really good back then. We go backstage to an interview with the Acolytes and Michael Cole. Now, the Acolytes hadn't quite yet become the APA yet, but they were getting close. And they were going to be taking on the Dudley Boyz, who just signed with the company. So not only did I get to watch Jericho's first pay-per-view match in WWE, I got to watch the Dudley Boyz too. And before their match, the Acolytes are backstage talking shit, and they say that they already ran one ECW team out of the company, and they have no problem doing it again. And they, of course, are referencing the Public Enemy, who they just absolutely beat the shit out of, I think, on Monday Night Raw, and those guys were sent packing. I think they had a little bit more respect for the Dudley Boyz, and that would show in their match coming up. Now, right at the end of this interview, there's this big, loud commotion off camera, and it shows a bunch of wrestlers. Just half the fucking locker room is just beating the shit out of headbanger Mosh, who at that time was known as Chaz. The Headbangers had split up. They made Mosh this beaver cleavage gimmick where he was teamed up with, or he was paired with Mariana, and it was supposed to be like this mother-son sexual type of thing. And after a couple of weeks, I think he just shed the gimmick. I remember him doing like the Goldust thing where, Dustin came out and said, Goldust is dead. And I think beaver cleavage kind of did the same thing. WWE maybe realized what a stupid-ass gimmick it was and decided to drop the whole thing. And then Mariana was just known as his girlfriend. But then it took a weird turn when Mariana started claiming and accusing Chaz of beating her up. So you have some domestic violence storyline going on here. Mariana's going around telling everybody that Chaz beat her up, which triggers the locker room into beating the shit out of Chaz. Long story short, Mariana was lying. We all knew that anyway, and I can't remember how that got paid off or how that got revealed, but I'm pretty sure GTV was involved somehow, and I remember the Headbangers would actually get back together shortly after this. So that was a really, really stupid storyline, which still, to this day, looking back, I don't understand what the fuck the point of it was. Next up, we have Jeff Jarrett defending the Intercontinental title against Chyna. Chyna got this title match in a really interesting way by signing up in an open contract on Jeff Jarrett's door, kind of taking the match out from underneath Billy Gunn, and I think she would even have to face Billy Gunn in a match to get this opportunity, which she would win. Backstage, you've got Deborah, who had recently split from Jeff Jarrett. She's back there with Miss Kitty. Jeff Jarrett shows up. He's talking shit to the both of them and makes Miss Kitty come to the ring with him. Harvey Whippleman is your scab referee in this match. He gets knocked down at one point in this match near the end and is like dead for a half an hour. The match is okay between Jarrett and Chyna, but what can you really expect? Chyna, I think she was kind of coming into her own as a wrestler around this point. She would start getting better and better, and she knew what she was doing a little bit to have a passable match. And Jarrett, to be honest, was a really good person for her to be in there with, because he took care of her, made her look good, and got a lot out of her, I feel, in this match, looking back on it now, 20 years later. Absolutely bonkers kind of finish here. Just so Russo, just so much going on, just from all different directions. Now, Jarrett, in recent weeks on TV, has been beating the shit out of a bunch of women, putting women in the figure four and bashing Moolah and Mae Young over the head with guitars. Moolah and Mae Young are at ringside for this match watching. They hop the barricade, get in the ring while the referee is down, and they start just beating the shit out of Jeff Jarrett until he counters with a double clothesline, knocks them both down hard. They both took really sick back bumps, which is crazy to look at, and then Jarrett starts putting the boots to him. Deborah runs in and hits Jeff Jarrett with a guitar, exploding it right over his head, allowing Chyna to pin him and win the Intercontinental title. She starts celebrating. The crowd is going nuts. I remember being in the audience going like, holy shit, a woman just won the Intercontinental title. Until the lead, or the head, I guess, scab official, Dr. Tom Pritchard, comes out and tells Bruno what happened, and he reverses the decision and DQs Chyna. and Chyna would get pissed and then beat the shit out of Pritchard and would hit him with the pedigree as well for good measure. Now, this whole thing would wind up setting up Jeff Jarrett's exit at the next pay-per-view, which I think was No Mercy, correct? And that was like the good housekeeping match. And they would even do a funny finish there where I think Jarrett wins just to swerve the audience, because I remember watching No Mercy on pay-per-view and knowing about the Jeff Jarrett situation that had somehow gotten reported in the Observer or on the hotlines. Can't remember where I heard it, but I did know of it going into that pay-per-view. So when Jarrett won, I think they actually did something where he did beat Chyna, but then it got reversed and she would wind up winning in the end. I thought that was a nice little swerve to kind of fuck with the audience, who by that point started hearing about backstage stuff and knew that Jeff Jarrett was on his way to WCW. So that was a really kind of interesting situation, but man, was there a lot going on in this match. We get that Dudley Boyz and Acolytes match up next. Really cool to see the Dudley Boyz in the WWE. I remember thinking it was kind of eerie to see them coming out there. When they signed, it was pretty big news, and it was going to be interesting to see how WWE used them, because a lot of fans were assuming they were going to be very much like Public Enemy. And this match was a slobber knocker. I mean, what else would it be, really? And interesting enough, in this match, the referee would be Jimmy Korderas, who I guess crossed the picket line. So he was the referee for this one, and I'm not sure why they had one regular official cross the picket line. I guess it's so they could use one in a match, and since the Dudley Boyz just got there and hadn't really been in a whole lot of WWE matches yet, it probably was better to have a seasoned official in there with them. Not much to talk about in this match. It was the slobber knocker that we expected, and you could tell just by the way that the Acolytes were selling for Dudley Boyz that they had a hell of a lot more respect for these guys than they did the Public Enemy, and they gave them a lot. In the end, though, you would see the Acolytes pick up the win. You know, imagine that happening today. Imagining a team like the Dudley Boyz, you know, a big-time team, tag team championship team, coming in from another promotion, and they come in and lose their first match. And all the fans on Twitter would be freaking out that it was stupid booking. Why would you bury them their first night? But it wasn't without outside interference, just like every match on this fucking card is. Something is going on. There's no clean finishes anywhere to be found. It doesn't seem like on this entire card. And the reason the Acolytes got the win here for the most part is because Stevie Richards, who had been doing the Charlie Haas gimmick before Charlie Haas did, he was coming out impersonating other wrestlers like Jericho and Mick Foley or Dude Love, I think. And he came out here dressed as one of the Acolytes. And back then, if you remember, Bradshaw and Farouk had those funny looking tattoos on their chest. Well, Richards had the same thing, except it was the UPN logo, which looked hilarious. And in the end, after he helped the Acolytes win, they beat the shit out of him, which was even better. Next up, we had a hardcore women's title match. Hardcore rules in this match between Ivory and Luna Vachon. Ivory, I believe, was the champion defending in this thing. Not that great. The entire thing took place backstage. The only thing that was funny is when Luna Vachon tried to make a Xerox copy of Ivory's face, stuffed her face in a copy machine and closed the lid. That was pretty funny. And Jim Ross, oh my God, Jim, I love you, with the SNL Rob Schneider reference, making copies, he blurts out when Luna has got Ivory's face pressed on that thing. That made me laugh my ass off. But the rest of the, I guess, match you would call it, was not that great. Tori would get involved. She had something going on with Ivory at the time as well. Ivory fought her off, and I think used a stick on Luna or something like that, some sort of a weapon, and wound up just winning the match. And then she would immediately leave the match and go right over and interrupt a Moolah and Mae Young promo, and they would then kick her ass. Moolah and Mae Young would beat up Ivory, and Ivory was a pretty good heel. Like, looking back at everything she did, I enjoyed her as a heel. She was funny. Next up, we had an interesting match between two of the greatest WWE tag teams in history. However, they were not on the same level at the time of this match, and that, of course, is Edge and Christian taking on the New Age Outlaws. Outlaws were 10 times more over than Edge and Christian. Edge and Christian really hadn't found their niche yet. They were baby faces. This was actually basically a babyface match. Now, Billy Gunn won the King of the Ring. I was there for that show, and he was immediately buried by The Rock at SummerSlam. His King of the Ring victory did nothing for him. It went nowhere, and it was pretty much forgotten about by the time we got to September. So they put Billy Gunn and Road Dogg back together. They actually beat the Rock and Sock Connection for the tag team titles like right before this. But they came in as the champions defending against Edge and Christian, and they would get the victory here with some interference from the New Brood. Gangrel had split with Edge and Christian and has now aligned himself with the Hardy Boys. So Matt and Jeff hit the ring. I think they did away with Michael Hayes or whatever, and they hit the ring, interfered, and helped the Outlaws win and scurried away. And this would lead to the big match the following month between Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys for the services of Terry, which now my memory cannot think of how or why Terry got involved in this thing. But that was the big ladder match that really put Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys on the map. And that's really when they started developing their own identities. By the time we would get into early 2000, after WrestleMania 16, that's when Edge and Christian kind of started becoming heelish and being cocky, cutting promos and turning into that team that would be every bit as entertaining, if not more so, than the New Age Outlaws ever were. So it was a really interesting time and an interesting match to witness, considering both of these teams are so legendary, yet neither one of them got to face each other when they were both, on equal level. But still an interesting match to watch, and Outlaws retained in that one. The next match up was the Kennel from Hell, which is exactly where this match came from fucking hell. This, of course, was Al Snow versus the Big Boss Man in a double structured match. This was going to be a steel cage with a Hell in the Cell over top of it. Now, I got to make an admission here and say that when they first proposed this, I liked it. I liked the sound of it. And I thought it was going to be really cool to go and see this giant structure live and in person, to see that awesome old school blue bar cage inside of a Hell in the Cell. I thought it was going to make a really cool visual. And it would be the second Hell in the Cell match that I would witness live in the same year, because I was at WrestleMania 15 and watched Big Boss Man get hung from that damn thing. And yeah, come to think of it, hell, Boss Man was in 2 Hell in the Cell matches in the same year. That's kind of interesting. Didn't even think about that till just now. But I was able to see the WrestleMania 15 match, and now I'm here to see this Kennel from Hell match, which on the surface and on paper did not sound that bad, because I thought it was a cool concept. You know, this whole thing started because Boss Man was feuding with Al Snow, and he kidnapped and killed and cooked Al Snow's little Chihuahua Pepper and fed it to him, which is still to this day one of the wackiest fucking things I think WWE has ever done. And the rules and the objective of this match is to escape the cage. This is kind of like a cage match. It's the first one out wins the match. However, in between the blue bar cage and the cell, they're going to have like Rottweilers or pit bulls surrounding the ring, or police dogs or canine units, whatever the fuck they were. And that's where the clusterfuck ensued. I remember when these dogs were coming out, all you could hear from your seat was barking. Those dogs were barking their balls off. And if you watch the pay-per-view, you notice that one of the dogs takes a piss as soon as they get inside the cage. This thing was horrible. The fans didn't care. It was dead silent in that arena throughout the entire course of this match, and it was long as hell too. I'm pretty sure I left and went to go get either a beer or go to the bathroom and came back during this match. It was not very fun to watch, not only live, it really sucked to watch on camera as well, and it was just awful. Al Snow, in the end, got the victory by beating Boss Man out of the cage. Boss Man was trying to cut a hole in the ceiling and escape that way because he was too scared of the dogs that wouldn't have done anything anyway. The dogs gave less than a shit about anything going on in the match, and that's the thing that sucks with dogs. I mean, you're trying to have dogs out there to attack the combatants if they get in between the cages. You know, you can't tell the dogs what to do. You can't explain to dogs what a work is. You know, it's just so stupid that they even fucking attempted this, especially since the dogs spent all the time shitting and pissing on the floor and barking at each other. So finally, Al is able to escape the cage. He goes out the door ahead of Boss Man, who's trying to get out through the roof, and wins the match that way. And mercifully, that shitty match comes to an end. Not a good year. You know, for me, watching some of these matches, I saw 2 shitty Hell in the Cell matches and 3 really bad pay-per-views throughout 1999. Next up would be the Chris Jericho and X-Pac match that I referenced earlier on. I have a lot of personal memories about this match as well. Number one, this match was last minute. This match was put together on Sunday Night Heat when they did the injury angle with Shamrock writing him off TV. Now, unfortunately, we would never see Shamrock return. I thought he was just going to be temporarily off of TV and come back because it was originally supposed to be Ken Shamrock versus Chris Jericho. Jericho attacked him on Heat, and Shamrock was out of the match, and they replaced him with X-Pac. And it's a shame that we never got Kenny back because I always really liked him. And Wish he would have had longer than a 2-year run in the company. During this time, Chris Jericho was also put with Mr. Hughes, which I thought was so stupid. And luckily it didn't last very long. Hughes was sometimes just put with dudes. Jericho and Triple H both had like a cup of coffee with Mr. Hughes. I don't know why. If Hughes didn't work with one long-haired blonde dude, I don't know why they thought he would work with another. But they would constantly try shit like this. And luckily, Hughes did not stick around with Jericho for too long. What's interesting about this match, too, is I didn't remember this until I was watching it back on the network here. As Jericho is making his entrance, it's taking the production crew forever to break down the Kennel from Hell cage, plus a whole bunch of dog shit and piss to clean up off the floor, too. So Jericho was really taking a sweet time during his entrance. He even gets in the ring and cuts a promo while they are still breaking the cage down. And I kind of had forgotten about that. I don't remember any of that watching it live for some reason. I don't know why. But Jericho and X-Pac, they have a really good match, and I will never forget how upset that I was. I was just salty as hell at the North Carolina crowd because I had been to so many shows in Charlotte, in Greensboro, all around the Carolinas and the Southeast that I really didn't like the audience there. I thought they were just a dim-witted crowd, and sometimes they would just do the dumbest shit, and this was one of those instances. Now, if you watch the pay-per-view match back on the network, the crowd is distracted. Something's going on in the audience, and I can't remember. It was on my side of the arena, and if I remember right, it's usually back in the Attitude Era, if the crowd is distracted, it's usually one or two things. Either one, it's a fight, or number two, some girl's showing her tits. And I have a feeling it might have been a girl with her shirt up or something like that, but I don't really remember what the commotion was. And what really made me mad is not so much the commotion, because a commotion like that or a fight or a topless girl can distract any match, no matter how good or bad it is. What was upsetting me is the fans. And I didn't hear this when I was listening on pay-per-view, but I could damn well hear it from my seat, and it pissed me off. I had so many fans near me chanting, boring, boring. And I remember just in my smarky ways looking around like, are you guys fucking kidding me? You got two of the best wrestlers in the world right here. I was a huge Jericho mark. I was so happy that he was there. I had a lot of his Japan tapes, and I had a lot of his ECW stuff, and I really enjoyed a good portion of his run in WCW as well. And I thought this guy was tailor-made, especially his attitude was tailor-made for WWE and the WWE Attitude Era that we were all witnessing at the time. And I was so offended that these idiot fans were chanting boring, boring to a match that when you watch it back is really good. And it's just those fans, I just felt like they were just there to see Stone Cold and they didn't appreciate good wrestling. And I remember being such a snotty smark about it and just downright like offended that these fans were not showing Jericho and X-Pac the respect that I felt like they deserved. But looking back, I'm not completely in the right there either. That match was thrown together last minute on Sunday Night Heat. There was no issue, no heat, no beef between the two. Jericho had just gotten there and he'd cooled off a little bit. He burst onto the scene confronting The Rock. All he did was cut a promo at SummerSlam, and he wasn't doing a whole lot on TV other than a couple of matches with Road Dogg. So he hadn't gotten rolling yet, and he wasn't hot, and he wasn't off to a hot start, and he doesn't even win. So not only do the Dudley Boyz lose their first WWE pay-per-view match, Jericho does too. He loses by DQ. And Road Dogg would come out in the end and brawl with Jericho a little bit as well. And I thought the match just could have been so much better, and I wish the fans would have shown the match a little bit more respect. Now, what's interesting about this, as I mentioned it earlier on, something happened with me and Jericho after the event. Now, after the event, me and my buddy were driving to Greensboro because that's where Raw is the next night. And like I said, this was right after the hurricane as well. And, roads are kind of bad. There's no GPS back then. So a lot of times when we're driving down a road, we don't know if we can get down it because of the floods and all of that. So driving was kind of tricky during that trip. And we're driving middle of the night, of course, because it's super late on the East Coast. I think we might have found a Waffle House or whatever we did, which was a normal thing on the road. We'd always go to a Waffle House and we would always meet wrestlers every single time without fail. And this time we just happened to be in the car and I'm following this big 18-wheeler in front of me. And my friend who travels all the time, he's always on the road, props to him, who might have saved our lives here. He notices before I do that the 18-wheeler was kind of like fishtailing a little bit ahead of us. And he's like, slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down. And he tells me to slow down. And we watch this giant truck just lose control. And he weaves back and forth on the road and fucking tips over across the road. I mean, crazy accident, but luckily It's super late at night. There's nobody on the road, and nobody was really involved. I don't think any other cars were involved or damaged. It was just the truck. The driver even climbs out and is okay. But because there's a big ass truck laying in the road, a lot of cars are stopping. And as we jump out to, see if anybody needs any help, a minivan pulls up right behind my car, and out jumps Chris Jericho, Edge, and Christian. And the funny thing is they actually thought that we were part of the accident. They were asking if we were okay. They offered us rides to wherever we needed to go. And we had to be like, no, we should have just pretended. But we were like, no, we're fine. We pulled over to help. We're not involved in the accident. We just, we're the first ones here. And everybody was okay. And they kind of hung out for a while. A few other cars pulled over and made sure everybody was okay. A couple of people recognized who they were. I saw Christian trying to pick up a girl. He was getting a number on the side of the road, which is pretty funny. I can tell that story 20 years later. It's no big deal. I'm not ratting anybody out. That's what wrestlers did back in the day. But I had a really interesting conversation with Jericho. Once everybody calmed down and everybody realized that no one was hurt, I was able to shake Chris Jericho's hand. I said, welcome aboard. I said, I'm so glad you're here. You're finally here. And he kind of gave me one of those, oh my God, tell me about it, bro. So I'm going to see Jericho this January when I go on the Jericho Rockin' Wrestling Rager Cruise. And I can't wait to see him again. And I'm interested to see if he remembers this shit at all. But it's an experience that I'll never forget, and a really, really interesting one. And it's one of many. Like, as crazy as that story is, there's so many that we have like that. So many wrestler interactions from the Attitude Era. It was so easy to see and run into these guys and talk to them. And I had even gotten backstage a time or two. And those were the days, and I miss them dearly. So anyway, that's my Chris Jericho Unforgiven 1999 story. We move on now to the main event of the night, the Six-Pack Challenge. This was for the vacant WWE title. Vince McMahon actually won the title on SmackDown, beating Triple H for it. Triple H, of course, won the title the night after SummerSlam in 1999. Vince relinquishes the title, knowing that he can't really defend it, and puts it up for grabs in the Six-Pack Challenge involving Triple H, Kane, the British Bulldog, The Rock, Mick Foley, and The Big Show. And Vince McMahon, who, of course, was supposed to be gone from WWE when The Undertaker lost the first blood match at Fully Loaded, that was supposed to exile Vince from the WWE. That lasted about 2 months. Austin was the only person with the power to reinstate Vince McMahon, so he reinstates Vince in exchange for a future title shot, and Vince agrees and also makes Austin the special guest enforcer for this big six-pack match at Unforgiven. So Austin, it was kind of sad seeing Austin in this role because this was really close to the end for him. They were about to do that angle at the Survivor Series where he would be run over by the car and he would be gone for a year to get that neck surgery. And this was right at the end of that, and he was kind of working hurt a little bit. I think he would work with Triple H at No Mercy, but by the time we got to Survivor Series, they had to shoot that angle to get him off of TV. The Undertaker was also originally supposed to be in this match. Like I said, he is on the cover of the pay-per-view poster here, but he was dealing with an injury as well, and basically just on TV he declined to be in the match, I think. And I remember he had the bandana on and everything, and it was kind of interesting. The last time we saw him on TV prior to returning to the biker, he kind of already looked like the biker. That was cool. And he wound up being replaced by the British Bulldog, who I believe might have wore his wrestling tights for the last time. I remember in this match he came out in his old British Bulldog gear, and I was so happy to have the Bulldog back because I hated when Brett got screwed and the Hart Foundation was broken up. This was a couple of months after Owen Hart passed away. Bulldog was back in the company, and I really hated his final run there. He wasn't in very good shape. I couldn't stand that he was wrestling in jeans. But for this match, he busted out the old Union Jack trunks there, and I think it would be the last time I remember seeing him come to the ring in those. And that's a shame. Kind of sad here to see the Bulldog in this condition as well, although he looked okay upon his initial return in 99. By a few months later, and we got into early 2000, it was really time for him to kind of hang him up, I think. But he held his own in this match and took a really gnar chair shot from Austin right at the end. The match was Really crazy. We had all sorts of stuff going on. You had Jimmy Corderas, the referee that did cross the picket line. He was the referee for this thing. Austin was on the outside of the ring as the enforcer, but spent most of the time drinking beer and doing guest commentary, which was really funny. And at one point in the match, near the end, as everything's going on with everybody hitting their finishers and getting near falls left and right, you have all of the protesting referees show up, pull Jimmy Corderas out of the ring and start beating the shit out of him. The sight of seeing like 7 referees stomping another referee is something that I don't think I'll ever forget. I kind of forgot about that as well. Stone Cold makes the save, runs over there and beats the shit out of all of the referees, saving Jimmy Corderas, and gets in the ring and takes away a steel chair from the British Bulldog after he had already hit The Rock with the chair, and Austin just nails Bulldog so hard with that chair. Bulldog goes down, falls like a ton of bricks, right as Triple H is nailing The Rock with the pedigree, who had just got struck right in the head by that chair from the Bulldog, and Austin has no choice as the enforcer to get down and reluctantly count the 1, 2, 3, and Triple H wins the WWE title. So just like that, Triple H is a 2-time champion. And after the match, Triple H demands that Austin gives him the belt, and instead, Austin hits him with the stunner and celebrates with the crowd with the Stone Cold music, sending the North Carolina crowd home happy. It's the equivalent of Hogan Must Pose in the 80s. You gotta send a Southern crowd away with Stone Cold Steve Austin's music at the end of a show. So at the end of the day, this was not a good pay-per-view, but still an interesting one to witness live. And I have so many memories and road stories of just traveling to these Raws and these pay-per-views and these house shows. It was an absolutely glorious time to be alive, and I miss it a lot. So anyway, thank you for sitting through this very long, This Day in History, a little bit longer than normal. And as I look at my timer here, this is going to be a pretty significantly long commentary here. So I'm going to go ahead and make this audio available as well. So if you want to download this for any reason, I know I'm saying this late. I should have mentioned that at the beginning of the video. I'll make sure I let everybody know that on social media. I will put this audio up on my website for download, and it will also be available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Spotify. So keep that in mind. Until then, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Smash that like button, please. I really need the likes. Click that notification bell and shoot me a follow over on Twitter. Thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you guys real soon with another This Day in History. I'll talk to you then. Peace.